Okay, we're live.
Excellent, thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, everyone joining us from Asia. Good morning, everyone joining us from Europe, and hello to wherever you're based. Thank you so much for joining us today for this live session, Q&A, how to apply for an ERC grant. This is an initiative by EURAXESS Worldwide, specifically the worldwide hubs in Korea, in Japan, and in Southeast Asia. And just for you to get to know who your representative is, my name is Susanne Rense-Vaso. I am based in Singapore. Jenny?
Hi, I'm Jen Elmaco. I'm based in Manila, but I'm supposed to be in Vietnam soon.
And then we have Thomas.
Hi, I'm Thomas. I represent EURAXESS in Korea, in Seoul. I'm based here.
And we have Judith.
Hey, I'm Judith Erekamada. I'm the EuroSouth Japan rep. A very warm welcome to all of you.
Thanks so much. And of course, we have with us today the ladies of the moment. We have Dr. Ylva Huber and we have Dr. Kristin Kraav. Both of them are from the fabulous NCP network, the National Contact Points, specifically in charge of any questions related to applying for an European Research Council grant. And this is what we're talking about today. We're talking about the ERC grants. Lots of you will have hopefully joined us for the information session just on the 1st of October. If you have not had the opportunity to join us on the 1st of October, here is just a very quick summary of what we're talking about today. We're talking about the European Research Council grants, and they are grants that are supporting groundbreaking projects and researchers at progressive stages of development, which basically means for researchers at different stages in their career development. What is very unique about these grants is they are set up for scientists, by scientists. They are open to researchers of any nationality, any age, any gender, and from anywhere in the world. So you're joining us not from any of these Asian countries today, but maybe from Africa. That is just as relevant to you. The ERC basically provides long-term support, individual grants for groundbreaking research, and the tagline here is high risk and high impact. There are no thematic priorities. All fields of research are supported, and that includes the social sciences and the humanities. It's a purely bottom-up, curiosity-driven approach. So it's really up to you to develop a research idea and then get your grant to start working on it. The sole selection criterion for the ERC grants is scientific excellence. And we have, as I said, invited two experts today, Ylva Huber joining us from Austria, and Kristin Kraav joining us from the Estonian Research Council in Estonia. Good morning, both of you.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
And I think without much further ado, we will start the Q&A in a second. Now, before we start, this is live streamed on Facebook. For those of you joining us on Facebook, please use the questions and comments section. We are keeping an eye on the comments section. If you have a question to one of our panelists today, just type it in the comment section and we will refer your question to either Ylva or Kristin. So please make this as interactive a session as possible. This is just for you today to get out any question that you have on the application process for the ERC grants. And I think if you're all ready, then we get started. Now, this first question here is for Ylva. Which institutions and which countries are eligible to host ERC grantees?
So once again, good afternoon. Thank you for this question. So principal investigators, ERC principal investigators can be hosted by institutions located in Europe, in an EU member state, or an associated country, typically. There is one exception, the Synergy Grant, where this host institution can be based outside of an EU member state or associated country, so in any third country. But this really applies to the grantees. It's maybe important to bear in mind that team members, in any case, can also be hosted outside of an EU or associated country. So there's actually a lot of flexibility, but the principal investigator typically will be hosted by an institution in the EU or an Horizon Europe associated country.
Thanks so much, Ylva. Our second question is also for Ylva.
Okay.
Are
Yes.
doctors of medicine, are they also eligible to apply for a starting grant or an ERC consolidator grant?
So starting and consolidator grant is a bit specific because here you need to have a certain formal eligibility or actually admissibility criterion. So in principle, you would need to have a PhD degree or a PhD equivalent. So something that is recognized by the ERC as an equivalent to a doctorate. And a medical degree is per se or as such not recognized as a PhD equivalent. You would need some factor if you only have an MD and not possibly an MD and a PhD, then you would need some additional factor to make this medical doctor a PhD equivalent. And that could be, for instance, a postdoctoral fellowship, a professorship appointment, or in some German-speaking countries, the habilitation would also make this MD a PhD equivalent. There are quite some details there, but if your MD is in this way converted to a PhD equivalent, then your time window is also prolonged a bit. And actually my advice would be really to liaise with the national contact point and at some point possibly also with the ERC executive agency, because there are many different curricula in the world, many different medical curricula. There have also been some recent changes, and my experience is it can be very helpful to ask the ERC executive agency upfront whether, for instance, your documentation suffices to prove this doctoral or doctoral equivalency, and then you can save lots of worries. So that would be an additional advice. And with that, back to you, Susanne. Thank you.
Thank you, Ylva. So the next question is for Kristin. Do I have to spend all my time in Europe, or is it possible that I could perhaps also hold a faculty position in my home country, for example, in Japan, simultaneously?
Yeah, good afternoon or good morning to everybody listening from my side as well. This is a good question because many researchers who want to apply for ERC already have positions, and these positions are as important to them as perhaps doing an ERC grant. And fortunately, the answer here is yes. You can split your time between Europe and your own country, which is outside Europe, but there is a minimum time that you have to spend in Europe. So for all types of grants, the principal investigators have to spend at least 50% of their working time in Europe, with the exception of that one synergy grant PI that Ylva mentioned before. But in addition, it is important to keep in mind that there are also minimum working time rates for spending on your ERC grant. So for starting grant, this is 50% of your working time. For a consolidator grant, it is 40%, and for advanced grant, it is 30% of your working time, as well as for synergy. So I would say that it would be easier to split your time between several countries if you're going for an advanced grant. In the case of a starting grant, I find that it is perhaps not the best strategy. Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you so much. Our next question. Sorry, let me just check that I didn't jump a question here. Here it is. So this question is for Ylva. Do I have to describe the host institution in my proposal? Ylva, what is your answer?
Thank you. So there is no formal requirement to do so, but definitely it is advisable to do so. And it's not a big part, it should not dominate the proposal. The proposal is really about you and the research you want to carry out and why this is exciting. But it is very good to explain why this research will be carried out in a very conducive, very stimulating environment. So, and it can also underline the commitment to the project. Possibly the host institution makes available additional resources, or you can have synergies with other research groups. So yes, I would describe it, but please bear in mind that the host institution is also not an evaluation criterion. It should be something that supports your proposal, shows that you have really thought it through well, but it's not a focus on the host institution. And maybe to underline that, you may know that the proposal or the grant actually is portable, so you can at any stage later, if it makes sense and if it's helpful also for you, transfer the grant to another institution in the European or associated country. So I hope that has covered the question, and I would give back to Susanne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ylva. Now, I think the question of a host institution is, of course, one that many potential applicants are really concerned with, especially how to identify one. Maybe, Kristin, you can share some advice on this question here. What should the applicant's strategy be in identifying a host institution for their application, and what should be, a focus of the discussion that the PI has with the host institution before the application is submitted?
Yes, thank you, Susanne. Well, for researchers currently outside Europe who have ERC on their radar, I think this is one of the first questions that you need to address, is where in Europe or in an associated country you are going to carry out your grant, or which host institution you are applying with. And this is no easy task, because you probably have several reasons of choosing your host institution. The main reasons probably are scientific reasons, probably because this host institution is this exciting environment that Ylva mentioned in her previous answer. It has specific infrastructure or access to a specific equipment, and probably the answer here is different for different host institutions. First of all, of course, you need to discuss your scientific idea with the host institution, and they should also give a green light to your application. In many European institutions, the green light is quite easy to get, I would say, because host institutions are very excited about your groundbreaking research, and they wish to be your host institutions for an ERC grant. But also host institutions, especially the more experienced ones, they can be a very good judges whether your idea is actually ERC competitive, and they can give you good advice on that grounds. And also, if the scientific idea is accepted by the host institution, of course, the administrative arrangements of your grant period should also be discussed at the application phase. What are the additional benefits perhaps that the host institution or the country provides? There can be very different such benefits. For example, in some universities, an ERC grant is an automatic acceptance to a tenure track position. In some countries, there is national funds that are available, or host institution funds that are available to complement your ERC grant. So all of that, I think, should also be discussed. But yes, I would say that although the role of the host institution in the application is, as Ylva mentioned, not very lengthy or very strong, it is still one of the crucial decisions at the grant preparation phase to choose your host institution.
Thank you so much, Kristin. And of course, whenever Ylva or you would like to add something, yes, or Kristin, you'd like to add something, then just let me know.
We would do a co-conference, yes.
Yes. Exactly, absolutely. Good. I will move to the next question then. This is another important question, I guess. Can the PI already have a position at the host institution at the time of the application, or does the person need to move elsewhere? Ylva, what would be your advice here?
It is definitely possible. And we often get the question the other way around. Do I already have to be at the host institution to be able to apply? So it's completely free. It's not like in Marie Skłodowska career action where you have inbuilt mobility. This is really, you can have been around for quite a while in the host institution already, or really move to a new institution. So that is not a topic. And actually, I'm afraid I don't have any statistics. Do you know, Kristin? I don't know. I think quite a lot, at least in Austria, quite a lot of applicants are already at the host institution, but there is also already some movement. I wouldn't be able to give good statistics here. And it really doesn't matter. I think that's the main message. Thank you, Susanne.
Yes, thank you so much. So I guess, you know, just to summarize, it's entirely up to the applicant to choose the institution that best complements the research idea that he or she has. And as you said, Kristin, as well, which brings the best conditions, you know, in terms of maybe additional funding, infrastructure, maybe even, you know, a faculty position, etc. So it's entirely up to the applicant. Fabulous. So let's move to the next question, but Ylva's already answered that. So it is indeed possible to move the ground. Exactly. So this, you know, is important for people to know. This is a transferable grant. So if you get to your host institution and you realize, oh, this is really not how I imagined it to be, you can take the grant and move elsewhere. So that's the simple answer. So
yes, also just a small comment that you can also move a small part of your grant. So we have had cases where the PI wants to split the time between several institutions, and you can also split your grant between several host institutions. But that is, of course, quite complex. Yeah.
But really, it's frequent also at our end, and the only prerequisite is, of course, that the project still can be implemented. So you should not run it into disaster, but we are not aware of such cases.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So it is possible as long as it's feasible.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
So the next question is maybe then for Kristin. Who signs the grant agreement with the ERC?
Yes, it is the host institution that signs the grant agreement with the ERC. And then after that, the host institution signs a work agreement or a contract with the PI. So the legal body is the one that signs the grant agreement.
So maybe to add, it's a bit fun because as a principal investigator, you're actually the center of everything. If you withdraw, the project is gone. But in legal terms, you are a third party. You're a third party to the agreement because the money flow is, as Kristin said, on the level of institutions. So.
Yeah, because we just have a question coming in from Jum. And Jum is asking, maybe just to elaborate on this, does the grant money, is it awarded to the PI or to the institution? Maybe Ylva, just to clarify.
So the money flow, is really going to the institution, but it's, I mean, it's very important maybe to read this commitment letter that the host institution has to sign and to submit with the application, because this is actually the core of the so-called supplementary agreement that Kristin just mentioned that is concluded between the host institution and the PI. And this guarantees scientific autonomy, and it guarantees that you as principal investigator are in charge also in terms of allocating funding, and also many other important things like publishing with whom you want and so on. So yes, because the participation, that's a principle for the entire EU framework program, and I guess many other funding bodies as well, that you have a legal person, which is where the money flows. So it's not going on your personal bank account, but you can really steer the money flow. Yeah, and you're supposed to work closely and actually to be supported by the host institution in this process, also in terms of reporting, financial reporting, and so on. Sorry for elaborating maybe a bit much, but there may be questions on that possibly.
Thank you so much, both of you. Let's move to the next question. The next question is, this is a question we get all the time when it comes to a host host institution, where could the applicants find up-to-date information on the conditions regarding the participation of British institution in ERC projects? Maybe, Kristin, you have an update what the current state of play is, or maybe what the outlook is for the future.
Yeah, there are, I can give a short answer and a long answer. And the short answer is that UK is fully eligible for ERC in Horizon Europe. So that is now without doubt, without question, and UK can host ERC grantees. In fact, UK will be participating on equal terms in the whole of Horizon Europe, with the exception of one small funding scheme for companies. But I could refer you to our British colleagues. The British National Contact Point is in an organization called UKRI, and they keep a very nice and updated information on the association process and all the legal rights and etc. And there are very handy fact sheets that are available from their website. So yes, the UK NCP would be the one to give you answers to your detailed question about British institutions in ERC. But the big relief is that we can say, yes, the UK is eligible for ERC fully.
We are happy to send the link into the chat. Sorry, I just tried, but I couldn't. But we are happy to send the link to the UK.
Yes, I also have the link at hand. Maybe we can share it to you, Susanne, later on.
We will send the link in the Facebook page now. One of the colleagues who are in the session will send the link now on the Facebook page, so you can look out for this. So thank you so much. So that's good news, because I guess in Asia lots of institutions have partners in the UK. That's good news. And this also is a question, people that are working on their proposal, of course, they want to get an idea, what does a successful proposal look like? Is there a database, Ylva, where someone could look and find maybe successful ERC proposals of the past? Where would they have to?
Well, there are two answers to this. So you have 10,000 project abstracts of successful ERC proposal abstracts, so covering in 2,000 characters the essence of the project. This you find in, I think, this great resource of the ERC project database. Now it's called Data Hub, so you find it directly at the ERC homepage. And there you can really search systematically with keywords or according to evaluation panels. In addition, there have been a lot, actually increasingly more successful ERC proposals, or full or part of proposals floating in the internet. And actually we at FFG did once comb the internet a bit. So we have compiled a list of around 15 to 20 proposals that have been kindly put online by ERC grantees, and this can be very helpful. It should, of course, not be seen as a blueprint in any way. It would be terrible if ERC proposals start looking like each other, but it can be very helpful also to understand how you actually can provide so much information as you need in only 5 pages to convince evaluators. So, but you can look for yourself. There are lots of networks, academia, for instance. People start kindly to put their proposals also online. But the bigger resource in terms of topics that have been funded is the ERC project database. I hope that helps with that. Back to you, Susanne. Or Kristin, and you have, sorry.
Just one comment on this, that this actually is a kind of mandatory job that you need to undertake before you start designing your own project, because first of all, you can be sure that an idea that has already been funded will not get funded twice, but also just to get an idea of the ambition and the scope of the project. I think this is quite necessary work.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, both of you. And we will just be posting the internet, the website details for the Data Hub on the Facebook page. So just keep a lookout. That, of course, as we've heard from our 2 experts today, is a fabulous resource for you to look at what other people have applied with and are being funded. The ERC website, just to add, is really a treasure trove of information. You find a lot of testimonies there as well from kind of current and past grantees, just to get an idea what this groundbreaking, high impact, high risk research is that the ERC is funding. Perfect. Let's go for the next the next question. Looking at the proposal preparation, what would be the most important documents to prepare? I think we had Ylva answering. I can't remember now. I give this to Ylva, maybe. Ylva.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I would say the most important document is really the ERC work program. It's because not only because it's a legally binding document, but it really captures the essence, if you like, also the mindset. It's maybe a bit dry reading in a way, but it captures the mindset and really also the conditions and information on CV and track record. So this is the essence and the big reference. But the second, I would say, very helpful, not binding, but really guiding document is this so-called information for applicants. And for instance, this is already out for some of the calls in the work program 2022.
I think Ylva has some internet problems. Maybe Kristin,
Yes, maybe.
Jump
Yeah,
in.
I can jump in and we discussed with Ylva that very, very clever of you to invite the two of us. So yes, the second is the information for applicants. You can find this at the ERC website at the little box for the open calls, but it is also referred to when you go to the funding and tenders portal. Ylva, I just took over from,
thank you.
your answer.
I was just lost in space, but I'm back. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so as we've heard, the work program, of course, is the key document that you should read really to get an understanding of how the application is built and also what those key terms are that you need to respond to in your application to make sure that the evaluators can tick the right boxes. Wonderful. So we'll continue. And the next question for Kristin. This is a question that we get so often. It's a very simple one, I guess, but what is the participant identification code? And maybe if you can just quickly elaborate what this is for.
Yes, this participant identification code is a code that is attributed to each organization that participates in the framework program. And this is to ease the administrative processes. It was introduced several framework programs before, and the goal of it is actually to identify the host institution so that the host institution does not have to prove its existence every time it signs a grant agreement. So this participant identification code, most, I would say, experienced organizations, well, all experienced organizations in Europe and in associated countries already have it. So you can find it with a simple search, or you can just ask your host institution. But also new organizations who participate for the first time. At application stage, you can register your organization and get a temporary participant identification code. And later in the grant agreement preparation phase, the organization has to send in their legal documents to verify their legal body. So I would say that in the case of ERC, I would expect that most of the host of the organizations are quite experienced in participating in Horizon Europe, and therefore you would find their PIC codes in the funding and tenders portal.
Thank you so much. And if I just summarize again, this refers to your host institution in Europe, because we have that question sometimes where people are wondering whether it's the institution where they're currently based, for example, the University of Malaya. This is nothing to do with this. This is purely the European host institution that will have this PIC, this specific code. Thank you so much, both of you. We'll turn to the next question, which is, which refers to the eligibility criteria. Now, we know there are, as we said at the beginning, grants for researchers at various stages of their career development. So the first one, of course, is the starting grant for researchers with a PhD plus 2 to 7 years of experience, the consolidator grant for those with a PhD plus 7 to 12 years of research after obtaining a PhD. Ylva, how hard are these windows? How is there a little bit of flexibility?
The windows as such, I'm afraid, are rock solid. It's actually an eligibility or admissibility criterion, maybe rather than an evaluation criterion, but it really decides whether you can apply as a starter or as a consolidator or not. But the flexibility you mentioned is there in terms of there are defined possibilities to prolong this window. But otherwise, maybe we come to this later, there are some possibilities, for instance, parental leave, that this window is extended. But if there are no such factors, I'm afraid it's really followed to the letter. So you will actually find for each call under the work program, the definition of this time window for the call in question. So there's a fixed reference by the ERC, and then there's the date from which you start calculating this time window. And this has been done simply to try to not to have too many applications. It is, of course, already a competitive scheme, so that you somehow streamline a little bit. But maybe it's good to add that the reviewers, they will look also at the time that you are, let's say, they will see if you are early in the starting window or late, or if you're very early consolidator or a late consolidator. So I wouldn't be too worried, yeah, if you realize you've fallen out of the starting grant window and are an early consolidator. They will take this into account. But yeah, maybe to leave it here. And
yes, just one more comment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One more comment on the grounds for extending the eligibility window is the good news for female researchers who have children. So for each child born before or after PhD, it doesn't matter, the window is automatically sort of extended by 18 months. So you only had to provide your child's birth certificate. So it is really to help female researchers to be more competitive at ERC grants and to make the competition more equal.
Thank you so much. And I think this leads us to the next question. You've already answered it, so there is an extension. But maybe, Kristin, what about male applicants? Because in some countries, men, of course, fathers are entitled to paternity leave. Is that also recognized?
Yes, absolutely. But the difference is that for female researchers, the birth certificate grants automatic extension of 18 months, no proof, no extra proof needed. But for male researchers, only the actual time taken off work is counted, and you have to prove it with an official document. And this official document can be from your employer, stating that you took time off because of parental leave, or it could be from an organization, competent organization in your country that perhaps provides funding for parental leave. In the case of European countries, this would be often the social security organizations that do this. So the system differs in each country, but yes, for male researchers, actual time taken off work proven with official documents. And just to add to this 18 months automatic extension, of course, you must request this. It's not so automatic that you that it happens to you. You have to request this and add the birth certificate. But also, if as a female researcher you took more time off than 1.5 years, then you can also request an extension that is longer than these 18 months. But then you also have to prove the extra time.
Thank you so much. That is great news. Would either of you know at the top of your hand, what is the ratio male-female applicants on average for the ERC grants? Is it fairly equal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's,
It becomes more
Kristin.
equal for starting grantees, I think.
Yes.
So in the starting grantees, it is visible that the numbers are getting more equal, but with advanced grants, I think we still see quite a big difference. So I would say for starting, it is 40% of female applicants or grantees, but in advanced grant, it is still like above 20, I think.
Yeah, so I think also I had some average in mind, like 20-25% when we once did an overall some years ago, an overall assessment. So that would be in line. Yeah, that there's less female applicants still, but on the rise.
And it's quite different also panel by panel. So in some fields of research, like social sciences and humanities, but also life sciences, there are more female applicants and female grantees, while in physical sciences and engineering, I think the male researchers dominate.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. But overall, good news. So automatically for women 18 months and for fathers taking care of their kids, they can also get an extension. The next question to Ylva. This, of course, is always at the top of people's mind when it comes to showing how qualified they are. Do they really have what it takes to be an ERC grantee? What is meant by this whole concept of having at least one independent publication? And how concerned should applicants be about this whole concept of publication record?
Well, the core is that for the starting grant, the reviewers want to see evidence of you as PI in an early stage of your career, already thinking on your own feet, already moving somewhat out of the wings of your PhD supervisor and starting to pursue your own research ideas. Now, many years ago, this sentence was a bit different. It said, have at least one independent publication without the PhD supervisor as co-author. Now, this has been mellowed down meanwhile to as main author or without the PhD as a co-supervisor. So the core is you should explain your role in the publication. The best setting still would be that you can have at least one publication without your PhD supervisor as co-author, but the ERC is aware that there may be institutional requirements. It may not easily be possible. And therefore, you're invited to explain your role. And it makes a lot of sense if you have to list, for instance, as a starter, your 5 top publications, that you explain your role in them. And ideally, there should be some first author publications, also depending on the field, of course, depending on the scientific domain. And you will know what are the customs in your field, and you should explain your achievements accordingly to that. And yes, because you asked Susanne, publications play an important role, but they will seek to take the full picture into account. So think also about talks, think about awards, think about institutional work that you have done, services to the community, things that show that you have received recognition and that you have established a network already, and start pursuing your own scientific vision. But publications play a centerpiece, and therefore you should think about what present publications you put there and the role that you had in them. Kristin, maybe you want to add something if I forgot.
No, I think that you said everything, and as the work program mentions, you must show potential for independence and signs of maturity. So this is something that you want to keep in mind when you describe your role and your publications.
And actually also for that reason, this project database we mentioned can be very helpful, because you don't only see the abstracts, you see, of course, the names, and you have to do some work, you have to Google them, and you can check what was the publication list when they submitted. But this can be good, really, to give you a bit of a feeling. And actually, at our end, we see a large variety. Thank God, I would say. So there is no metric or nothing saying, okay, below in reality 2 publications, forget it. This is not true. So they will really look case by case. And what the panel member once said to us is, when I look at a CV or a track record, I want to see something special. So you should make this informative, these few pages that you have, like for a job application, and show what makes you stand out at this early stage of your career. That's maybe some addition I would make.
And definitely in case of ERC, quality over quantity is what matters.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Give them the webpage, they will Google you.
I think there's some great advice here. I think there's some great advice here. So it's really not just, you know, you have to have a minimum number of publications, but as you both said, they want to see the whole picture. And you are unique. So, you know, your research career is unique as well. You just have to make sure that they understand what is special about you and worth funding. Great advice. Thank you both. So the next question then, hopefully you have been awarded the grantee. How much time do you have to spend on the ERC project? Ylva, what is your advice?
Okay, I lost the sound connection now, but I hope you can hear me. So it depends. I think, like Kristin already mentioned, also it depends on the grant you have. So for the starting grant, the minimum time commitment is 50% of your total working time. So think really of everything you're doing, also teaching and so on, 50% of that. And then it's mellowed down a bit, 40% for consolidators, 30% in the case of the advanced grant and synergy grant. I think it's a very good idea if you can to go a little bit beyond that. It's not a secret rule or something. You are fine in principle with this minimum commitment, but they like, I would say by tendency, reviewers like to see that really you devote a lot of energy, and this is really your main channel to carry out your scientific vision in the next 5 years. So I would think it's good if you can go for 60–70% without running into a burnout. It should work with everything else you're doing. But I would never recommend now to say 100%, as sometimes was done in the beginning. This can bring you into trouble, because then in principle you wouldn't be able to glance sidewise once. Yeah, you couldn't teach, you couldn't go to a conference not related to the project. You don't want that, I think. And in principle, also if the grant is transferred somewhere, the new host institution may want you to teach. So I would not go much beyond 90%. And typically, I think the host institution would be ready to cover the rest of the salary, because you bring a team, you bring lots of funding. So because in the beginning, they often said, go for 100%. I think this is not a good idea, but additional commitment below this, beyond this minimum level, I would think is good.
And also the working time minimum is cumulative. It's over the time of your grant. So you might want to start, and the ERC favors that, with a higher commitment, perhaps in the first years of your grant, when you are setting up the team and you are supervising maybe more intensely your team. And then in the later years, you might have more time then to look for other funding sources that, for example, you want to carry your research with after the ERC grant runs out. So you must have more time to apply for other types of funding and yeah, all this. So I would say that if you promise a percentage, then take this into account, that maybe more at the beginning, less at the end. But cumulatively, you must do the work. You must commit the working time that you have promised in the project. It is observed and it is monitored by the ERC agency.
Thank you much, both. The next question is directed to Kristin. Am I allowed to integrate a co-investigator into my project? What is the general rule?
Well, the grants, they are individual grants, they are for the principal investigator, but always the idea is that you will have a team with whom you will work. So if this co-investigator refers to your team member, then the answer is always yes. Yes, you are allowed to have team members. You will recruit team members at different stages, but it is quite important in the case of ERC, also in the case of starting grant, that all the team members are sort of under your supervision. So they are there to carry out your project. But if the co-investigator refers to another principal investigator at an equal level to you, then this is possible only in the case of synergy grants, where the grant, when the application is done jointly with 2 to 4 principal investigators. And of course, the grant amount is larger, and also the scientific questions that are addressed are slightly different than for the normal single PI ERC grants, in the sense that you would have complex questions that need multidisciplinary approach. And in that case, yes, you would have several PIs, 2 to 4, working together on one grant. But in a normal ERC grant, you would have different levels of team members, some of them PhD students, some of them postdocs, and some of them could be experienced researchers who are working with you to carry out your project.
Thank you so much, but only one PI. And as we've heard, there is one exception, which is the ERC Synergy Grant. Just for those of you that may be interested in this, we have a webinar on the ERC Synergy Grants on the 11th of October at 9 o'clock Central European Time. So just maybe check in again. But I think we have some more questions here on the idea of the team that you are forming as an ERC funded PI. Ylva, are there any specific requirements regarding the project team? For example, can someone choose team members that are based in so-called third countries, meaning countries that are not part of the European research area?
So again, the ERC is really, you can see it's by scientists for scientists. So really thinking about your team means thinking what your project really needs. I mean, you have the limit of the budget, but otherwise go for your dream team. What do you, as Kristin just laid out. And yes, if it makes sense scientifically, and it often will, you may have field work, you may have interviews and so on. It's perfectly fine to have also team members based in third countries outside of Europe. But overall, let's say there should be some credible team building in Europe that should be happening. But everything that is required scientifically will usually work. And this mix that Kristin just laid out, I think that is very typical. I mean, by tendency, if it makes sense to you and if you can have PhD students, I still think this is a very good idea. We sometimes see comments by reviewers regretting a little bit if you only take postdocs on board and it's not necessary. They like to see a little bit of good PhD projects possibly, but it's not the focus on career building for your team. So if you think you really need a certain experience level and you don't need PhD students, for instance, it will also be fine. So whatever makes sense works. I would say it as maybe easy as that. Kristin, would you have anything?
Just the warning that I already mentioned, that it is quite, I think, difficult for starting grantees to involve very senior team members. In that case, when you want to do that and it is necessary for your project, then it must be very clear from the team setup that you are still sort of the owner of the project and you are leading the whole team, including the more experienced colleague.
Thank you so much. Let's see the next question. This refers to, oops. Oh my God, I'm here. This is a question. So if you have, as we just heard, it's entirely up to you to identify the talent that you want to assemble for your dream team. Do you need to have their approval before you submit the proposal? What is your advice, Kristin?
Yes, there is actually the requirement is even harder than that. So not only team members, but any researcher mentioned by name, even as a collaborator, must be informed beforehand, and you must have written agreement from all of these people to be mentioned in your project. These agreements do not have to be submitted by together with the application, and they of course don't have to be very formal. They don't have to be stamped and signed, etc. A simple email will do, but just that all people who are mentioned in your projects are aware of that and are okay with that. So that is the requirement, and you must be able to maybe prove to the ERC that you have explicit agreements from all of them prior to the submission deadline. So, and not that after you have been awarded the grant, you ask them, oh, would you like to participate in my project? But prior to the submission deadline, you need this written agreements. And this, I think, was introduced to, of course, protect also not only your team members, but maybe some important researchers in your field from just name dropping. And it is an anecdote, but I think it has happened that an evaluator or a reviewer has found their name in the application and been greatly surprised because they knew nothing about it before. So it has a good reason to have this prior written agreement in place, the requirement.
Maybe it's good to recall that all potential team members, I mean, as it is phrased here, it would really be people that are named, names that you're reading, but it may be helpful to recall, you may not know a single team member already because you may just put profiles. You need a PhD with interest in X. You need a postdoc with long-standing experience in XYZ. So you can just put profiles there, and actually it's very welcome, and Euraxis can help, of course, also in terms of recruiting then the best possible researchers for these positions. So it's fine if you have some names, but actually by tendency I hear reviewers may like to see some NNs, some unknown positions, let's say not yet recruited positions, because that would also underline that you actually are breaking new ground, that you're, maybe if you're a consolidator, not just carrying on and just putting positions for team members already identified. So maybe that's also worth thinking about.
There's some
totally
great advice there, absolutely. You can put just the profiles and you can also make sure that you are creating new positions for future researchers, for early career researchers. And, you know, as you said, it's probably wise not to put in any names of people without asking them, because that will make sure that you never ever work with them again, I guess. Maybe before we move to the next question, I have a question here that came in on Facebook from Dimitris. And Dimitris is asking, and this is for both of you, what are the deliverables of an ERC project? Is it journal publications? Is it establishing collaborations, proof of concept? What exactly is expected from the PI? It's a very open question, but maybe both of you can share a little bit of insight here for Dimitris, who's asking this question. Maybe Ylva, you did?
Yes, yeah, okay. I'm losing connection again, but I start talking. Okay, so it's really, I mean, very typically are, of course, publications, maybe monographs, so things that assemble the knowledge and put it out there for the scientific community. It can also be a database and addition. It shouldn't be the main outcome though. Yeah? So the core is really you are generating new knowledge, and there are typical channels to disseminate them. And that's the main outlet, I would say. But again, it's really flexible. A proof of concept was mentioned. There is a specific scheme for that. So it really depends. If you're in material science, you may have also some technical reports. But I would say the usual scientific main communication channels really showing that you have changed the field and actually maybe answered long-standing questions, this would be it. And it's not like in many other EU-funded projects that you have a very clear that you have to call it deliverable or something, or that you have this very fine-grained structure. It's really, yeah, it's fine if you say publications and maybe some dissemination activities and so on. So it's not a grid of terms that you have to follow as closely as for other EU projects. Maybe Kristin, you would like to add on that or emphasize?
Yes, I think
something?
that definitely, I totally agree with Ylva that the focus of ERC is on scientific output. So this is the main focus of deliverables. And there are also some mandatory deliverables that are now common for all Horizon Europe projects. And one of them is data management plan. So there are some administrative things like that. Your host institution, no doubt, will help you to put these together. But other than that, I think, yes. And sometimes the ERC also requests some ethics deliverables.
Yes.
So, for example, if your research is quite, I would say, ethics heavy, then you might find that you will have to submit ethics approval before you can start with a project or a specific part of the project that needs some ethic approvals, and you might have to submit other ethics deliverables as requested by the ERC agency.
Thank you
but
so
this
much.
is not something that you have to foresee. This
Yes.
ethics, I mean, of course, you can promise it already from the start if you know that that is going to have that is going to happen. But yes, I have now made an introduction to the next question, I realize.
Exactly. Maybe if you want to continue, because that is a question we get a lot. What exactly does that mean? What are ethical issues? And this comes a lot from people that are thinking, oh, I'm a chemist, or I do something that has nothing to do with ethical issues at all. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit what the funder means by this and how this should be addressed.
Yes, the ethics issues are not specific to ERC. They are common for all Horizon Europe. And in the application forms, you will first find a list of questions that you have to answer yes or no. And then you find space where you can explain these ethics issues. And of course, the EC provides very good advisory documents. So anyone starting to tackle the ERC application, I really recommend that you go for this additional information in the documents provided. But in a nutshell, the ethics issues do not refer to ethics problems. This is now the first thing to understand, that it is not a bad thing to have ethics issues in your project. So it is just additional space for you to discuss these aspects. And of course, some of these ethics issues are a long-term recognized research areas that need ethics approvals, such as medical research or research into vulnerable groups in society, etc. But you will also find there questions in the ethics checklist that are perhaps you wouldn't think that this is concerned with ethics issues. For example, any, and this might be relevant for our listeners today, any cooperation with countries outside Europe in itself has to be mentioned on ethics issues, especially if, for example, materials or personal data are exported over the borders. And then you might also consider, for example, if you do field work in faraway countries or in countries where the researchers might need, the researchers themselves might be in danger, for example. So what are your measures of protecting the researchers also during this field work? So the ethics issues, yeah, they start with the very typical questions of whether you do research on humans and animals or etc. But they come down to also those questions that perhaps you did not, you would not consider an ethics issue when you first think of it. And for the chemists out there, I would say that all chemists will have to answer yes to at least one question, because there is a question, are there harmful substances in your laboratory? And please show me one lab that does not have any harmful substances. And of course, the goal here, as I mentioned, is not that labs will be free of harmful substances, but the goal is that the researchers are properly protected. So in that case, the chemist, for example, would have to just explain the safety procedures in the lab, and that is quite straightforward.
Thank you so much. And maybe Ylva, if you'd like, the same issue comes to the gender dimension, because that also, of course, is important for any grants funded under Horizon Europe.
Yeah.
Maybe you could say a little bit about that, how this needs to be addressed and why it needs to be addressed.
Yeah. On one hand, I mean, this is now dealt with, I say, on a structural basis with the gender and equality plans, and the host institutions need to have those in place at the signature of grant agreement. But it's also, it will often, I mean, depending on the context, but it will often be very helpful. And I think every researcher should look at her proposal and thinking, could this be relevant scientifically? And we know of so many cases in clinical trials, but also other types of studies. So this is, of course, an issue. And secondly, it's not a hard criterion, but researchers will be looking at also if you take some measures in your team to have really diverse and teams working well together, and looking also at this aspect. So it's not, I would not say use lots of pages. You have very limited amount, of course, in this research proposal to elaborate on that, but think very much in the concrete context of your project, and I think your project will profit from thinking about it. So therefore, yes, it is important, but it's not meaning that you need to spend lots of pages on that. It should be concise and clear.
Thanks so much.
The questions have disappeared.
Well, I think it might be nice also to see our faces
yes.
from time to time, I guess. So the next question, Ylva, I know that you're a bit of an expert in this. This relates to the open access. So how would you specify, or can you help us specify the open access related rules that apply to ERC grantees?
Maybe to give a short ad here, because I recently checked, and I think the homepage, I think it was recently completed also by the ERC on open access in Horizon Europe is excellent also for going into more detail. But let's say as a central theme, it is like actually in the entire Horizon Europe approach now. The idea is to make research funded by the ERC open access immediately without any embargo period. Before you had certain waiting windows in certain scientific fields, and now the results of your funding of your project, so publications, should be made open access at trusted repositories at the date of the publication at the latest. There are several channels one can use, and actually it's not only open access to publications, it's also, as Kristin mentioned, open access as much as possible to research data, following the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary. And also here there are many routes one can take. It's embedded, I would say, in the open science policy of Europe in general. But yes, you're also getting some very helpful guidance, I think, on this ERC homepage, because they give an overview on open access journals and on such repositories. And so that's, I think it's really helpful, but it's not anymore an exception. The ERC had some exceptions in its policies, and now I would say it's harmonized across Horizon Europe, because the main thrust is really make publicly funded research available also broadly. Don't close it into certain areas, and that is the general approach. I hope that is helpful. Kristin, if you would like to add something.
Yes, I think the general approach is nudging the whole, also the research publication industry towards more open access friendly. So it used to be that the best journals sort of would not allow such arrangements, but I think that this nudging from the funders has been quite effective in the past years.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. There's, as we heard, lots of information on the internet. And if you just also contact your access offices in your home countries or the countries where you're based, we have lots of information on open access and what is expected of you of someone funded under Horizon Europe. Now we have just a few more questions to go. Maybe if I just ask this to Kristin, our next question relates to the scientific panel that the applicant should choose for his or her proposal to be evaluated. Is there a little bit of strategic advice? What should be the key consideration when choosing the right panel?
Yes, in general, when you think of funding rates, then due to the bottom-up nature of ERC, all panels should have equal funding rates. So the budget is divided proportionally between panels according to the number of applications each year. So in that sense, you should not have a strategic goal to go for the best funded panel because all of them should be the same. But still, you might have several considerations. And of course, first thing that you should do is to check your keywords against the keywords mentioned under each panel and see where your project fits best. And then I have had this quite useful advice from panel members when advising which panel to choose. If you have several possible panels, then thinking of which panel would be more excited about your research. So who cares more about your planned research outputs? So maybe that is something to take into account. There is a possibility to also mention a secondary panel. This is a possibility, of course, that you should use in case your project is seriously multidisciplinary. But it comes with a tiny bit of warning from the NCP side, because although ERC is very conducive to multidisciplinary research, still statistically we see that just a tiny bit of difference, and these projects that have indicated a secondary panel have a slightly, very, very slightly lower success rate. And I think that is not a major thing to worry about because this is really tiny, and you should definitely go for mentioning a secondary panel. In that case, of course, experts from that second panel will be involved in the evaluation of your project. But basically, the panels are very wide. So most research, I would say, would fit under one panel. And the choice really is up to you based on the keywords and your, let's say, your assessment of importance of your outcomes for this or that field of research.
Maybe just to add here also that you think that the panel members, I mean, they are really wide. One would maybe think they are looking sometimes quite homogeneous, but in reality, in each of these subfields, there is quite a broad spread. For instance, history is going from ancient history to post-colonialism, for instance. So that these panel members will typically not be specialists in your field. So you have to address them as generalists, but it's very helpful to think, how would you address such a broad panel, broadly familiar with your field, but not expert in the very subject, most likely not expert in the subject that you write about. And that can also be helpful to think about from the start.
Absolutely. And it makes sense to especially take that into account when you write the B1, the shorter part of your proposal, because that is only read by panel members in the first stage of evaluation. So you have to address this quite wide group of generalists rather than narrow specialists.
Thank you so much. And I'm really glad that you said at the beginning there is the budget is allocated equally, because there's always a little bit of a suspicion that, you know, some scientific disciplines might be favored over others, and that's not the case. And as Kristin said, I think, or Ylva, I can't remember, but you have to choose the panel where you think you get people excited in what you're doing. So that's, I think, great advice. Now, there's a question also, I think this is for Ylva. Lots of PIs, of course, want to purchase equipment with their grant. How is that handled?
It is definitely, it is possible, of course, but typically it will be, you cannot easily simply buy the entire equipment if it will not be, let's say, finished or used up, depreciated within the time period of the project. So there are some national and also international rules how to account for equipment, and it loses, of course, value over the years. This is a so-called depreciation, and typically you have to account for this, so you can only get funding or reimbursement for the time where the project, where the equipment really is in use. But there are some exceptions to this, because sometimes equipment is really finished, is broken after 5 years, or there are some specific rules for this equipment. So actually that is one of the issues where it is very advisable to contact also the host institution in question, because they will also know about their depreciation policy, about their typical bookkeeping practices, also accounting practices, also because there may be exceptions to this. There may be the possibility that you actually buy the equipment, and also not to forget, you can lease it or rent it, and also this is possible, and it just cannot be more expensive than using these depreciation periods. But in this way, you can definitely include equipment. It is quite a frequent case, and you can actually even get additional funding for this. So this is one of the categories where you can get up to 1 million additional budget to really buy this great, or at least part of this great microscope that you may need for the project.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, both of you. We have quite some questions that are coming in, and I of course want to make sure that I address them here. So we have, first of all, a question from Nina, and she is saying certain types of research do take more than 5 years, which is the duration of the grant, to lead to publications. For a starting grant, does the funder expect us to publish within the 5 years, or is this not a constraint? Maybe Ylva.
Well, I mean, that is actually really a topic that sometimes publications happen also after the project. And there was for some time even additional funding for that, because that is something I didn't mention. You can allocate, and you should allocate budget for these publications. But at the moment, at least Kristin, if you're aware, I'm not aware of an arrangement right now that you can get additional funding for publications that happen beyond the project. But this is a topic of discussion. There was once such a fund, and I could imagine the discussion might increase. But at the moment, I'm afraid you have to publish as much as you can towards the end of the project, and then you're still expected, of course, to publish, and that would now be then carried by the host institution, and therefore I could imagine that they will discuss again the possibility of having a kind of follow-up funding for these type of publications. So I hope that helps a bit, but I'm not aware of a solution at the moment, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Yes, but the second part of the question was how does the ERC feel about a project that has no publications at all during the whole 5 years? So I would say I would not plan such a research, because it is a project. It has to yield some results within the lifetime of the project itself. So maybe towards the end, but yeah.
Yeah, I've never seen I've never also seen a project like that. I think it's always something that you would like to foresee, and if something happens and it's delayed, then you have a certain risk. But indeed, sorry for forgetting that. That is, of course, crucial. You should plan to have this publication within the duration.
Thanks so much. And Ylva, there's a second question also from Nina, and this relates, I think, to the ethical question. She's asking, if you are planning experiments on humans, and this relates to social sciences research, should the applicant submit the IRB approvals for all experiments should that be included in the grant before they submit the proposal, or can that be done afterwards?
It definitely can be done afterwards, and that's a very helpful question also. I think many researchers are worried because they know they will often not get the approval before the project is funded. So there could be like a vicious circle. That's not a problem. What the ERC wants to make sure, and what the EU wants to make sure, is that no activity starts before all the approvals, all the conditions are met. And that may mean, and that you will also define when the grant is actually really concluded in the grant management procedure. So no, it would often not be possible. You're not expected to. And it may also be helpful to know the ethics part is not evaluated. So this really is the sole evaluation criterion, scientific excellence. But everything you can do already, maybe example approvals or example questionnaires for this research and so on, that's good. That will help you save a lot of time, because I have seen projects where this ethical process, I mean, it was an exception, but took quite long, took nearly a year, because then they had to go for all these documents. So preparation is good, but nothing that is not possible will be asked of you.
And if I may add, then it is possible to add any documents that you already might have. For example, if you do have them, it is possible to add them without any page limit to the part B2 of your, or to add, not B2, but add them as a separate ethics annex to your proposal. So you have the possibility to add, but not an obligation.
Thank you so much. Now we have just a few more minutes and a few more questions, maybe a little bit about timeline. For example, the starting grant just opened on the 23rd and it closes, I think, on the 20th of January. What is roughly the evaluation period, and when could someone who applies for this call, when can they expect to start their project? Ylva, do you want to take this?
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to. So roughly, I'm afraid you still have to think after the deadline, roughly 1 year after the project will start, and you will be notified in 2 steps, because it's a 2-step evaluation procedure. So the first, actually quite a couple of months, I would say, probably May, June, I have to look it up again for this starting grant, you would be notified if this wonderful thing has happened and you have been invited to the interview, that the proposal goes to step 2. And then typically the interviews will be towards autumnish. It's a bit divided also depending on the domain you have applied to, scientific domain. And then towards the end of the year, you would then know if this interview, so if step 2 of the evaluation has been successful, and then you're supposed to undersign the grant agreement within 6 months of this notification. So that may in reality all be a bit quicker, so you can expect these notifications earlier, but I'm not aware yet that the proposal really often starts quicker than 1 year, let's say, after the deadline. But maybe, Kristin, you have had such speedy examples.
Yes, I think it's very helpful that in the work program, in the document that we have mentioned quite several times, there is this timeline, and you have the dates there, so you know what to expect when you have submitted. The dates are given as a sort of indication. It is not a kind of a binding date, and usually the information, you receive the information sooner than the date, but of course not much sooner. And yes, indeed, in the case of starting grant, you should know by the end of, by mid-December if you have been successful. And then the project itself should start within 6 months from that notification date, says the ERC, because it is groundbreaking research. It makes no sense to delay it a lot. Research develops so fast that it might harm the project if you postpone the start date too long. So it's rather that the ERC would like you to start the project as soon as possible within 6 months. But then they also say that they can be flexible. For example, if you have a previous grant that is running until some time, then it is possible to start a little bit later. And also, of course, if you are on maternity leave or parental leave in general, that is also a very good ground to postpone the start. But yes, the evaluation process is long, but then after that, you should start as soon as possible.
Perfect, thank you so much. And Christine, hopefully, of course, everybody who applies gets a grant, but what if they don't? Is there any limitation to when or if they can resubmit an application?
Yes, this is a very good question, and indeed there are some limitations. And if to just give you a broad description of these limitations, if you do not pass to the second stage of evaluation, you are not invited to the interview, you will receive a grade that is either B or C, and then you must sort of have a waiting time before you can resubmit of 1 year in case of this B, or 2 years in case of the C. So that is just to give researchers some time to reconsider their research application, their research idea, maybe do some additional research to find more substantial arguments for their research idea, etc. But in general, yes, 1 or 2 years if you do not pass to the second stage. But there is one notable exception to this. It's the very same synergy grant. And the synergy grant in this 2 to 4 PIs that we mentioned before, it is hoped that researchers from all stages of their careers participate in synergy grants, both younger and also more experienced researchers. But statistics says that mostly experienced researchers take part in synergy teams. And to encourage more young researchers to participate in synergy, actually there are no harmful consequences for failing in synergy grants for these younger researchers who belong to the starting and consolidator age groups or career groups. So, for example, if a young researcher, perhaps they would decline participation in a synergy grant on the grounds that they couldn't then participate in a starting or consolidator call. If they fail, now they can. So indeed, no harmful consequences for younger researchers in participating synergy consortia.
Excellent, thank you. And it is just about time for us to wrap up, but we have a few open questions. So maybe just quick responses to some of the questions received on Facebook. So we have one here from Dimitris. Dimitris is wondering, if someone applies for a starting grant and has only 2 years of PhD experience, and he is competing with someone who has 7 years of PhD experience, would there be an advantage to either of them? Ylva, your quick response to this one?
We are seeing actually the success rate is quite flat across the time window, but we have to acknowledge at the beginning there is a bit lower success rate. The ERC says that only few researchers apply at this stage, and is actually encouraging researchers to try it earlier. I would not see a real disadvantage or advantage, because reviewers will take into account your stage of career. So that would be the quick answer.
Thank
And
you
a quick
so much.
comment to that is that really it is not advisable to wait until the last year of your eligibility window, because then if you submit and you receive a C or a B, then you are out of this category and into the next. So it is also the official advice from the ERC agency that go for it at the very beginning of your eligibility window. Don't hesitate.
Thank you. Another quick question from Amna, who asks, is there an age limit to any of the grants? Christine?
No.
None whatsoever. Yes.
So very quick answer there. Even if you're 85 with a PhD,
Yes.
you can still apply.
Yes.
Fabulous. Another quick question here. We have someone, I think it's Nina. Nina is wondering, I think you've answered this before, but maybe just to clarify. Nina says, concerning the starting grant, if I move to Europe with a starting grant, from what I understand, the host institution has to hire me. And of course, they have to agree with that in advance. Is that feasible, especially as it kind of takes long for the university to to agree to this in advance. So the question is, do they have to have a position in advance? And I think, again, Ylva, the answer to this is quite quick.
Yeah. No, they don't have to, but this agreement of the host institution to engage the PI for the full duration of the grant has to be signed upfront by this host institution commitment letter.
Exactly. So the answer is you don't need to be hired, but there needs to be a commitment that if you are successful, they will host you at their institution. And then maybe that leads us kind of also to the final question. There's a question from Stefan Rutschmann. I think he's joining us from Thailand. He's asking for a proposal template for the starting grant. Where would researchers look for a proposal template, Kristin?
Yes, the best place to look for it is the Funding and Tenders portal of the European Commission. And under Horizon Europe, you would find the whole package of information for each open call. But you could also go to the ERC website. And if you download the information for applicants, it describes the proposal template. So it is not the template itself that can be downloaded in an editable format from the Funding and Tenders portal, but a good description and overview of this is at the ERC website. So the official ERC proposal submission website is the Funding and Tenders portal.
Excellent. And with this cue, I'm going to just share my slides just one final time to show you exactly what we've heard. These are the details that you should take note of. This is the ERC website. You will find, of course, all the information there about the different grants. As I just mentioned in passing, the starting grant call is currently open with a deadline of 20th January next year. So this would be a fabulous time now to start preparing your proposal. And maybe the final question, and I think it's obvious, where could applicants get more support in drafting their proposal? Ylva and Kristin, what do you think? Where should they look for support?
Whoever wants to start? Okay, but you have a very nice link here. Yes, the national contact points link.
Exactly, it's the national contact points, and Ylva and Kristin are both national contact points, and that basically means they're the perfect contacts for you to get advice on the formalities of your proposal. I think the scientific part, that's still entirely up to you, but they will help you with, you know, the administrative part around it. And just the final slide. Sorry, yes, Ylva, please.
Yeah. May I just add, please also use the resources by the host institutions. Many of them have very good practices in place, grant management services who can help you also with the tribes and customs of accounting at this institution, planning the budget and so on. So there's really a network out there. You're not alone.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And also, of course, there's EURAXESS Worldwide, and we are basically your local support team. So if you're based somewhere in ASEAN, in Japan, in Korea, these are our email addresses. But if you're based anywhere else, we have colleagues across the globe to support you. I'm just stop sharing now. Maybe this is, I'm just checking just once more if a final question has come in, but I don't think it has. So I think this is now the time for us to thank you so much. I think that was super helpful, very, very informative.
Very informative.
We hope that our audience today, you're making use of this information. And as we said, there's lots of support and resources out there to really make sure that you get the best chances for your proposal to be successful.
Many thanks for the invitation.
For us. Thank you so much,
Kristin, Ylva.
And good luck for everybody who is going to apply.
Yes. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed indeed. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon for one of the EURAXESS Worldwide webinars. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.